Great, welcome. Hello, Hadassah. It might be a small group today, but we'll just wait for a little while before we get started. But how are you? I'm not sure if you've got access to your mic. If not, I can check out the chat box. And Hadassah, if you have got access to the chat box, can you just make a note in if you came along to the first workshop, the general one back in March, out of
Hello,
interest?
hi Dee.
Hi, how are you?
I'm really sorry. It's my first time to join this workshop.
No, that's fine. Well, because I was going to say some of the things I'm going over again, and so I'm hoping that it'll all be as fresh as possible to whoever came along today. And
Mm,
I wanted to make it like a complete thing so that if somebody's looking at the recording later down the track, that they can sort of see
okay.
it. So yeah.
Mm. That
All right. Well,
I haven't checked yet, but yeah, I'll check the recording if you have that for workshop one. Thank
yeah.
you, Dee.
No worries. Okay. And look, the recording has started. So there's quite a bit to get through, and I think I'll start the session now. And so, first of all, welcome, and to people who are able to attend, and for people who are joining along, but also if you're watching this recording a little bit down the track, uh, there will be potentially other smaller videos coming out, but these sorts of workshops, we just wanted to record them whenever we could and make those available for students. So this is the second workshop that we're doing. So this one is about the basics of personal budgeting. Now, before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge country. So I'm here in Meanjin, Brisbane, on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people. And I'd like to pay my respects to all First Nations people on whichever campus you may be joining from. So to give some background, the first session that was done in March attempted to cover half a dozen of the topics that students asked to have covered in, I believe it was an Instagram poll. So, but there are a lot of questions that came through, and there were a lot of topics that students wanted to have covered. And we very quickly realised that some of the topics needed to be covered in more depth. And so one of the ones that we're asked to sort of spend a little bit more time and going into a bit more depth with is budgeting. And we covered it, I think, in about 10 minutes in the first session, but we really didn't do it justice. So this one is specifically focusing on budgeting. And for some of the other topics, again, it might just be a longer recording that you can watch whenever you have time and perhaps go back to, and then also very open to feedback if there's other particular topics or an extra way or a different way that you want to have things presented. We're happy to have a look at that. Okay, so in this session, I'll be starting with a general overview of what budgeting is. So I think sometimes it's given a bit of a bad rap. It can be seen as a bit of a chore. And in some ways, it can be something to turn your mind to, but I'm also hoping to emphasize some of the positives today and then look at some of the basics of budgeting, starting with goal setting. Sometimes when you've got a really strong idea of why you're doing it and what you're aiming for yourself, that can really help with motivation for sticking to a budget. And then a quick word on timeframes. And I know that a lot of students in the poll results really talked about very short-term urgent priorities, but I'm going to try and bring out some of the medium and longer term types of goals that you can look at and why the skills and some of the techniques that we'll go through today can be applied across the much longer term. So any of the skills that you start to practice now that you get to understand as part of your tendencies will absolutely pay off in the longer term as well. And so whenever we're talking about timeframes, I then want to talk about the time value of money, or in some ways, the money value of time, because for a lot of students who responded to these workshops, and welcome to Amber, a lot of students who respond to these workshops are young. And so for a lot of people have got, if you're under 25, you have a lot of time on your side. So I just wanted to sort of talk about that and the magic, the power of compounding interest. And then look at how you can prioritize some of your goals from budgeting, a quick look at some of the online tools, particularly the Money Smart tools, and then we're going to get into it, some of the budgeting methods, and a really in-depth step-by-step demonstration of one of the more common ones. It is quite Excel focused, and Ella, who organised this session, has a spreadsheet which has already got, it's pre-populated with fictional data that you can adjust, and it's already got the formulas in the spreadsheet as well, so that each of the steps that I go through, you can have something that you can use and adapt and modify for your own purposes. And then a couple of tips on how to budget when you're broke. I completely got the impression that there were definitely some students who were dealing with that. And some myths about budgeting, and then putting it all into action. So before we begin, I just want to emphasize the usual disclaimer that this is general information only. There's no personal advice, there's no product advice. And before you make any decisions, you need to take into account your own personal circumstances. So it's the standard disclaimer there. Okay, so getting into what is personal budgeting, and there's lots of definitions, but to put it simply, a budget is a plan for how you're going to manage your money to achieve your goals. And budgeting is the process that puts that plan into action. So it's very personal. It's a very intentional and hopefully fairly proactive process. Sometimes it can be reactive if you find yourself in a lot of debt and you've got that overwhelm. But, there's also, hopefully over time, it will start to become more and more proactive in terms of being really intentional about getting to some of your broader goals in terms of financial goals, but other lifestyle goals. And the approach that you take, it has to be very much about you. It can be fluid and flexible, or it can be very strict. So depending on your tendencies and what you know or what you find works through trial and error, it can be quite light touch, or it can be almost like a bit more of a hands-on micromanaging approach, or something in between. And the moneysmart.gov.au site, which I really encourage you to have a look at, talks about budgeting as something that can help you to be in control of your money. It helps you direct where your money can go to where you say it matters most, and lets you find ways of spending less and saving more to achieve your money goals. So, and I just wanted to there can be a lot of guilt and I think sometimes frustration when people don't necessarily stick to a budget. And so I wanted to frame it as a place to begin. Now, I have a range of interests, including life drawing. And I remember one time I was just sort of observing how the artists in the class had such different interpretations of what we were drawing. And my life drawing teacher said to me, what you are looking at there, what you are trying to replicate is your first point of departure. And I sometimes find that useful when people are first starting out with budgeting, to think of what your plan is, what you're looking at, what you're trying to replicate. Will inevitably perhaps change and look different because life happens. It's a living document. It's a process. And you need to bring your whole self into this process, or at least really encourage you to show up for yourself in this, now, even if you don't feel like you can get right into it now, or with, assignments and other things that are coming up. I hope that over time, or, very soon, or at least at some point when you've got a goal or a motive, a particular reason why you need to get into this, that you really do bring yourself into it. And, emphasizing that there's no one best way to budget, and there's certainly lots of different ways. And I will go through around about, 4 in detail and a few more, just so that you can see that the world is your oyster in terms of what works for you. And so you really need to think about what your personal tendencies and preferences are, what capacity you have in your lifestyle, and, in terms of work and caring needs, what your income might look like. Some people it's fairly stable, and for others it's quite changeable. So And it takes reflection, humility, and being really open to the process and open to changing and noticing things about yourself as you go through it. So seeing it as a bit of a personal reflective tool rather than an imposed chore, I'm hoping will help. And you might find a different method to what's going to be demonstrated today. So if it works, use it. And if it doesn't, don't give up. Keep asking for help, because there's lots of resources, materials out there. So the first step is really ideally identifying what your goals are. So this can be, financial, your broader sort of lifestyle goals. Again, just very personal. It takes reflection. It's your life, and you know what you're going to value in your life. which hopefully at the moment includes a lot of study, or at least, completing your first degree, for example. But of course, there's going to be other things as you go out, as you go, throughout life. So, and you might want to look at, okay, well, this is what I say I value. I say these are my goals. Let's look at some of the evidence. Let's look at some of the, put some truth into this in terms of what are my bank statements saying my priorities are, and does what I'm spending my money on align with some of those values, and are my goals really being prioritized in the way that I want them? And so this process doesn't have to be just about money, but we do live in a world where money matters. And so I just wanted to have a quick note, though, that there's been more and more narrative around the wellbeing economics approach to budgeting. And I love this particular definition of wellbeing economics about being based on contributing to a world where more citizens individually and collectively can live a life that they value now and in the future without preventing others from living the life they value. And this is as an aspect of human rights. So, just to broaden that, and as distinguished Professor Marsha Langton said, the world is run by those who show up, and it's not just showing up for others, showing up for yourself as well, and really keeping that longer term perspective in mind. So let's go to timeframes on that longer term perspective. And I know that a lot of people in the first session and people who have been requesting this information and potentially watching the videos later on are under 25, but I also realise that there are people who might be older than that as well. And so you might, if you are, depending on where you're at in terms of your career stage and other debts or assets or caring roles that you have, you might still be in a fairly short-term budgeting mindset and pretty focused on meeting those really short-term goals. And I got the impression from some of the responses to the poll that it was really about getting through to the next pay, the next 0 to 3 months, or the next year at the very most. But then there is the medium-term and the longer-term budgeting and cash flow planning that you can look at. And even though that might seem like, again, a little bit of a chore and a bit of a luxury if you're just sort of coping with survival for now, it can also be really kind of exciting and goes back to why you're doing this study in the first place. So that longer term planning will hopefully start to come into focus. Now, there's a few people on now. So there's this question here, and honestly, total guesses are welcome. We've been doing this for 2 minutes, so I'm just really interested in where your thinking goes, and just let yourself observe that. But in the chat box, if I was to ask you a question, and again, there's no one right answer, but what is likely to be your largest financial asset over your life course? And it doesn't have to be the largest, just any of the largest financial assets of your life course. So have a quick think. I'll give you just 10, 15 seconds to have a go at that, and then we'll keep going. I can see some typing going. It's when I've got 2 pairs of glasses for my different screens. Yes. Fantastic. And it's like you've been to the first workshop. And, for some people, it might be, houses, superannuation, range of other things. But your cumulative lifetime income tends to be, it's a kind of an abstract, intangible financial asset that a lot of people find hard to really grasp now. But say you're down at this 18 to 25 stage, and let me just get my pointer in case you can't see my mouse. So if you're still under 25, for example, you've got a long time to benefit from your degree, your qualification, and looking at the average income for a bachelor level, so an undergraduate degree, in 2023, the average across all discipline areas was 71,000. There's some variation there. But if you're working, say, for example, from 25 to 65, so at least 40 years, and you're earning on average in nominal figures, so in today's figures, not inflation adjusted, if you're earning around 100,000, that's $4 million before you've even taken into account investment returns that you can start to set goals for. So sometimes for a lot of people, when they're setting goals, the immediate sorts of goals are really important. But sometimes imagining or having a reflective practice of thinking, if you're in your 60s and you're looking at, say, your 21 or 25-year-old self and deciding what you'd like to have to show, by the time you're in your 60s, and thinking about what would I want that 4 million to cover? Now, a lot of it, of course, will be ongoing expenses, but there might be other things that you want to have done. And so those longer term goals, and of course, people will potentially partner up, and there'll be multiple incomes and other things that come into it. But at least having the mindset that this is a long-term prospect, and some of these skills can really help over that longer term. So for people, if you are under 25, and I know that there's at least some people who are on this session, you've got time on your side. And while I could also say it's never too late to start, there are some advantages to starting sooner rather than later. And this is an example of, which would give you more at age 65. Now, there's a bit of a leading question, but, in scenario one, we talk about, say you start at age 25 and you set aside $50 a week for 10 years, and then you stop and you don't add anything else to a savings and investment account, for example. So just for 10 years, you put $50 in, and then you stop and it's just invested until age 65. Or the second scenario, you're aged 45 and you put aside, so if you've had an extra 20 years of not investing and you're doing other things, but at 45, you start to put aside $50 and you do it for 20 years. So in the first example, you're putting from your disposable income effectively, $26,000 aside. This is before taking into account any returns. And in the second scenario, at face value, you're putting in 52,000 because you're doing it for 20 years. Now, assuming that there's a 7% return on this after inflation, and assuming it's compounded monthly, so that means that the interest gets paid into the principal, your starting balance, and any new amounts monthly. What you would have, and oh yeah, sorry, I'm just going to let somebody else in. Admit. Oh, yep, there we go. What you would have is, and these compound interest calculators, I'll put the link down the bottom, but they can be fun to have a look at. If you've got your $50 initial investment, 7% return net, post after inflation, compounded monthly for 10 years, you'll have, with $50 a week going in, you get around about 38,000. So you put in about 26,000, and after 10 years, you'll have 38,000. But now you're not going to add anything else to it. You're just going to invest it until you're 30. At 35, you stop and you invest it for 30 years. And if we go to the next slide, oops, hang on. Sorry, my mouse is doing something funny there. There we go. So at the next slide, so we put this 37,684 in for 30 years. We don't add anything else to it. We just let it set and forget. And that comes to 305,000. And so you can see in the graph here that most of this, well, obviously all of the return after that is interest. And so, of course, once interest goes on, the interest that has already been paid on top of the blue part, which is the principal, the balance that's been put in after the first 10 years, that compounds. And so it's interest upon interest, and that's where you start to see some of this magic go through. So in scenario one, you end up with 305,000 at age 65. Okay, let's go to the next one. And whereas in scenario two, if at age 45, you would put in $50 with 7% interest rate for 20 years, and you keep putting that $50 in every week for 20 years. So you will have provided $52,000 effectively at face value of your money. And at 65, it will be 113,000. So, I mean, that's better than being given a lump of coal. Like that's still a good return. Like it is never too late. But you can see the difference between starting at 25 and 45. When you look at scenario one, by starting young, you pay half as much. So you've got 26,000 compared to 52,000. And you pay for half as long. So you've done the $50 a week for 10 years instead of 20 years. And you get nearly 3 times as much at age 65. So it's about building up your baseline. Hopefully that sort of makes sense in terms of the power of $50 a week, but also, and I'm talking after 25 here. I know initially during uni, it is sort of just about survival, but I think sometimes, and this is the same whether it's $25 a week, and I've even got a little scenario here where we look at what that means if it was $100 a week for 10 years, or $100 a week for 20 years, depending on whether you start at 25 or 45. And again, when we look at the and I can make these slides available, but I just wanted to show, for $100 a week for 10 years, and then leaving it for 30 years, you end up with 611,000, but you've also paid half as much. For $100 a week for 20 years, it's 104,000, and you end up with 226. So again, you pay half as much for half as long, and you get 3 times as much at age 65. So that's what we call the power of compounding interest, but also the time value of money, or indeed the money value of time. So time is on your side. And as Megan Trainor said, it's all about the base. She spells it differently and meant something else. But really, getting your amount of investment up, the amount of your investment base, the amount that you have saved ready to invest up as sooner rather than later, means that that money can then work for you. It's not just all about earned income. So when we think about our cumulative lifetime income over the life course, for a lot of people, it's not just that, potentially $4 million if you're earning on average 100,000 over 40 years, but it's also then once you start to look at investing, that may also be some of the largest financial assets that people have, is how they, make that money work for them as well, and rather than just working for the money. So, having a bit of that focus on building your base of capital is really about having less discretionary spending now, means, more time to make the power of compounding work for you. Having said that, so that was just a note about the medium and longer term goals, because I really do understand that the short term goal is still a major focus for now. But the method that I'm going to go through in a bit of detail today can be used for any of these timeframes. And so when we're talking about short term goals, the sorts of things that you might be looking at, or that people have mentioned, is, for example, not having to take on any more work or any more hours of work while you're studying, certainly meeting essential costs within your current income, clearing any credit card and buy now, pay later debt. You might want to put a time frame on that. There are some people who really talk about healthcare, and then also personal care, getting a haircut, and, at some point, that's not just, flatmates doing it, or maybe even getting some contents insurance. That was something that we sort of spoke about briefly before the last session, because it was the day before the cyclone hit. It might be a short-term getaway, like actually, getting some fun experiences while you're studying. A new computer by the end of the year, not to forget that there's the laptop bursary that Griffith offers as well, if you look at our cost of living page. Or perhaps going out a little bit more, getting a buffer in an emergency fund, or you might have a goal by the end of the year of, yes, survival, but also building up enough of a balance in your direct debit account, and I'm going to go through how those work in a moment, so that all your bills can be automated and it's just one less thing on your mental load. So when you're looking at, and I really do encourage you to have a bit of reflection on what some of your goals are, and and prioritize that. So if there was one thing, one expense or one experience, or one of those goals that if I could, wave a wand and take it off your list, what would be the first one you'd pick, then the next one, then the next one. So you can really think about what your priorities are aligned to some of those values. And, and once you've got that, then we can start doing some sums. So I think a lot of people dive straight into, okay, here's all my expenses, here's all my income. But sometimes just stopping, having some reflection about some of those goals, and remembering, university study isn't forever, it will end. There's a longer term perspective as well. Now, before we do the sums, I just wanted to let you, or provided some links in these slides to some of the online tools and resources. Really encourage you to have a look at the moneysmart.gov.au tools. There's a new site which is just about to be launched. You can actually look at the beta version of this MoneySmart site now. It's similar, but I think better than the previous one. There's also, your banks will have lots of online calculators and phone apps. Oh, I actually mentioned a few other apps that aren't just banking apps a bit later on. So this MoneySmart website, though, has a budget planner. So it's sort of like a spreadsheet tool. You can download it. You can print off a report from it. You can even save it if you're, using their internet sort of site. But I also have an updated, populated practice, or let's call it a sandbox Excel file that Ella has hopefully sent out, or we can send out, that I'm going to go through, that you can also use as a starting tool to practice on, and adapt and adjust and improve. And I'm really taking it to, I've really sort of taken it apart so that you can see each step in detail. But on the Money Smart website, it also talks about how to work out your savings goals, and it goes right through to retirement planning, income tax planning and superannuation calculators. So the spreadsheet looks a bit like this. Some people find that very useful. It's like I've just put some screenshots in here. So take a look, and they've also got their own compound interest calculator. There's a range of those sorts of tools online. So I won't labour that too long because we've got a lot to sort of go into. But let's go back to budgeting, doing your sums first to get your baseline. So the first step is identifying and counting up all of your incoming money. And that is usually a fairly short list, and sometimes it might even be just one line. And but there might be a few lines of things that extra income that you might get from, either Centrelink payments or casual work and that sort of thing. And then identifying and counting up what is currently outgoing. And this is about really having an honest look at your bank accounts, trying to track that. Now, if that all sounds way too confronting right now, because it is quite an emotional process sometimes, there is a much longer list of outgoings than incoming on pretty well everybody's budget. But even really, and you'll think of other things. You'll think, oh, I owe this person money, and coming up with a reasonable sort of payment plan for that, might help. But if I could just sort of add in here that even though it can be quite confronting and emotional to go through that big long list, the practice of just writing it down and having it down can help sometimes feel that things are starting to get a little bit more contained, a little bit more in control, even just the process of writing it down, because then it's the starting point for working out a plan from there. And it can take away some of that mental load of just ruminating on it getting worse. Once it's documented, you've at least got some containment there. And then you can evaluate, well, what does my current spending look like in terms of my goals and priorities and values? And then it's about adjusting it to align with those a bit better. Okay, so recording your income, how much, where from, and how often is really, really important. So I've got my examples Excel spreadsheet based on a fortnightly payment, because I know that's when a lot of people get paid, and as well as when Centrelink payments and things go through. So, or you may have made I know you can sometimes make weekly arrangements for that. I think it's more common for people to get paid either weekly or fortnightly, more so than monthly now. But I know there are also some jobs that pay monthly. Okay, and then adding up all your expenses. So, and I won't go through those in a lot of detail, but I'll give you these slides in the spreadsheet, and there'll be others that you will have that you need to add to that. And then it's about looking at how you're spending, as in your wants, the shorter term, if there's any discretionary spending in that. So if your expenses are more than your incoming, then it's really about, okay, how do we adjust this so that you can meet the needs and some of those savings goals, as well as not just sort of short-term discretionary spending. Having said that, for a lot of people at university, there is nothing left over at the end of the fortnight, and that and it's just about getting through without getting too much debt and being able to cover those bills. And so I get that can also be absolutely a reality, and quite normal at this stage of life. All right. Now, one of the things I just wanted to mention in terms of setting up your savings goals, you might have savings goals in terms of, even holiday gifts or a weekend away, that sort of thing, new phone, whatever it might be. But then also setting up an emergency fund is something that I'm hoping can be added into your goals somewhere, because even if it is just saving $5 a week to build up an emergency fund that might cover you for, if you get a flat tire or a parking fine or something like that, it just takes the sting out of that rather than having to find it out of that fortnight's income. So I just wanted to mention that if that's something that you hadn't sort of thought about in terms of some of those goals. And then, of course, it's about adjusting that budget. Now, I wanted to just mention, because somebody mentioned, I think in the last one when I just talked about direct debits, and I realise it can be a bit jargonistic. And so a direct debit is, and bear with me if you've already got these set up, but I just wanted to make sure that we cover all these all the terminology as we go through. So this is when you can set up an arrangement with a third party. So that might be like a phone provider, electricity provider, your rental agency, and they can so that they can automatically withdraw funds from your bank account. So this is something that you can set up usually online, and it's prearranged that those regular payments for set amounts can be drawn out, and usually have some say in what the dates are for when they come out as well, to some extent. And so therefore, for larger bills, for example, like car registration or those insurances, sometimes people will stagger them so that if they make it, rather than for car registration, for example, which might be $800 a year, and they might have $200 taken out as a direct debit every quarter. So, and they might do the same for car insurance, but they would stagger it so that, one will come out 1 month and another one will come out another month, so they don't all come out in the same month. But that's where there's pros and cons to this. Some of the benefits of having a direct debit arrangement is you can just once it's set up, it's kind of like set and forget. You don't have to think about it. You don't get bill shock because the amounts are coming out more regularly, so it's not such a huge lump sum that you've then faced with. And you've pre-planned it, so it's automated, it's convenient, it's secure. So if there's any unauthorized transactions there, you get that, you have a guarantee of getting those back. And it's very efficient. There's less time and mental load and effort that you have to put into it once you've set it up. But the cons is it can take some time and patience to set up. And for some people, it's about, just doing one a week until they're all established. There is potentially a risk of overdraft though. So say you have your everyday transaction account and then you have a sub account, which is your direct debit account. If a direct debit is due to be drawn and there's insufficient funds in there, that could incur some overdraft fees. So I'm just about to give you a strategy for how to avoid that. And then also, if you need to cancel it, like say you change phone providers or electricity providers, it's just remembering to do that and then setting up the new one. But once it's set up and it's very, very popular strategy, very, very common strategy, and it helps you to sort of think it through, and it just is smaller amounts. So yeah, you can smooth that bill shock over time. And to give an example of how you can avoid going into overdraft, say you've got, and I've just got here, what's this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lots of direct debits that somebody might have set up. So they might have their phone provider automated to take out $50 a month from their direct debit account. The car registration takes out $200 per quarter, and that might be mid-July, mid-October, mid-January, mid-April. So there's never an annual bill. It's just taken out. Car insurance, they might take out $70 a month. Or set up a direct debit for that. Electricity, $75 a fortnight. So that might be where it's credited to the electricity provider, $75 a fortnight. And I believe that even in a share house, people can do this and then have, when the bill comes in, the other, flatmates can then pay their bit. But having that amount that's already in credit with the provider means that you don't, when the bill comes for $400 each quarter, you don't have to suddenly, flail around and find it. You've pre-saved that. And so even though the bill might come out in mid-February, May, August, November, every fortnight you might have your provider drawing out $75. And I've put here rates if you're a homeowner. And I've got direct debit for my rates and I'm way ahead on the account side, because I think it's something like $100 a fortnight they just automatically take out. At some point I'll just have to tell them to stop once it's sort of too far ahead. But I never have to think about any of my bills. I have them all just direct debited, but I do absolutely have to make sure that the account balance never falls below a certain amount. And then gym membership, $30 a fortnight might come out. So in total, say on one particular fortnight, one particular pay fortnight, even if every single one of these payments was to come out in that one pay fortnight, the maximum that they'd ever have drawn out in that fortnight is $500. So as long as your account balance never falls below 500, I'm not saying that that's all that you put into that account, but as long as you make sure that the minimum account balance you hold for your direct debit sub account is 500, then you won't, you should be able to, in theory, you should always have sufficient funds there to cover a direct debit draw. So let's go and demonstrate, and hopefully some of this will click. Now, the first method, and I touched on it really briefly in the first session, and I completely get that for some people this will be worse than having their teeth pulled, but is the spreadsheet planner. Money Smart has their example, and I'll go through a different spreadsheet example. Now, even if you decide that you're going to go with method 2, which is around percentages, or the one big thing budgeting method, or some of the other ones that we're going to talk about, sometimes just doing this even just once to set up your percentages and that sort of thing can be very useful, just to establish your baseline. What percentage of my income do I need to contribute to needs, wants, or savings? But also, after you've done it once, you might also find it's not as awful as you think. But I completely get, that for some people, it is just not going to work for them. So we'll also talk about some other different methods. So this can be as simple or as complex as you like. And for some people, they can set this up and then set up their direct debits for all their bills. And then all they do automate payments into different accounts. And then all they do is make sure their transaction account each fortnight never goes below zero. And that just sort of rolls over. Now, whereas other people can be very intentional, like they might decide, actually, I want to go to Bali at the end of the year or something. And so they add another line item in, and, so the budget can be very much a lot more hands-on. So it's really up to, and things can change, and so sometimes it does need to be updated. So the first step is estimate your incomings. And, I've just got a table here. I've tried to make it, look substantial with 4 lines, but it might just be 1 line. But anyway, say it's youth allowance, rent assistance, the energy supplement, and you might also have some casual work income. So that comes to $14.10 a fortnight. So I've done this fortnightly, and assuming that's when they go in. But if it's weekly, do whatever works for you in your time frame. Okay, so now, so you work that out, this $14.10, and on the spreadsheet, and I've sent an example. So the sorts of things and this is example only, please, adjust it, add in lines. I've got the formulas throughout the spreadsheet all the way through, like there's more columns I'm going to add in this session. And so, for example, this total for home already has the formula to add those sections up. But if you want to add another line in there for whatever you might have, please do that. So, for example, rent here in a share house, this person might pay $600 a fortnight, so $300 a week for rent in a share house with 6 other people probably. Anyway, electricity might be $50 a fortnight. But the bill might be $400 a quarter. Okay, so bear with me. We'll come to this. They might have a cleaner, $75 a fortnight. Lucky them. Telephone and internet and so on. Weekends away, they want to go 4 times a year. And so that's $2,000 a fortnight, or per annum, which is $80 a fortnight. So this is about your initial, for each fortnightly pay, what are you going to allocate to everything that's going to be in your outgoings, throughout the year. Now, in this example, as you can see, as you go through, and I've worked it out based on the 26 fortnights per year, regardless of whether it's an annual bill, fortnightly bill, weekly, or, whatever. And this comes to $2,054. Now, we've only got $14.10 incoming, so we are $644 over budget. So what we're going to do next, so at least we've got it down. And for lots of people, they'll have other things in here, whatever it might be. But this is a starting point. Okay, so, you might have subscriptions and that sort of thing. Okay, so let's then adjust. And this is where you sit down, you think, okay, and your priorities will become pretty clear. So, for example, if you've got to save $644, you think, well, the cleaner might have to go. That's $75 saved. Rather than going away 4 times a year, I'm going to adjust it down to 2 times a year. Or rather than it being a $500 getaway, you might still go 4 times, but make it a $200 getaway. And so that's reduced that by 40. Same with haircuts, you might just do 2 a year instead. Birthday gifts, you might reduce that rather than putting aside $50 a fortnight, make it 20. And then likewise, these 2 have also been adjusted now. And so once you've found that 644, then it's within budget. Okay, so now you've managed to work out what needs to be cut and what matches the budget. And please put any questions in, or feel free to interrupt if you've got a question as we go through. And I'm also happy to take questions at the end, and we can go back into this, even if it's off the recording too. Okay, so now we're back within budget. It's under $14.10. I say that like it wasn't a painful process for some people, because I know for some people it's like, oh, losing the cleaner or whatever. But then again, that might be such a stretch goal for a lot of people as well. But they also might absolutely love, in a big share house like that, it can sometimes be hard to keep shared spaces, looking great. Anyway, okay, so the next step. So you've got your budget now. So it's 1410 incoming, 1409 outgoing each fortnight. So that's a really important step. And then you can see how I've color coded each of these line items. So electricity is green, which is a need/bill. The blue is a savings goal. So these weekends away, the haircuts. Now, even the savings can be, it's like shorter term, or it can be medium term or longer term. And so when you think of savings, it's just basically anything that's not going to be spent in that one pay fortnight. And then the orange is your short-term spending. Basically, it goes out every fortnight. So it's that, I say wants, but I mean, let's face it, groceries is a need, as is potentially, some pharmaceuticals, and, other parts here will also, be a need. But if you think about wants as, that short-term spending, it's in and out in that fortnight. And the other two accounts, the need/bill. So this is where you could set up a direct debit account, as well as those longer term savings goals, which is linked to the goals that you've established that we talked about before you even start to do some of the sums. And so when your pay goes in, so when each of these different pays go in, you can automate it, and well, at least I do. And I know I've got 18 and 19-year-old, they've automated so that amounts go into different sub accounts. And for me, I find it fine just to have like the main transaction account and two sub accounts. Some people will have even more sub accounts to that, and I'll talk about the digital envelope method of budgeting shortly. But for a lot of people, just having three accounts where the main one that they focus on, once these other two, once the bills account, your direct debits, and the savings is set up, and they worked out how much is going to go into it every fortnight, the only account then that they really focus on is this short-term one. And so each fortnight they just make sure that that doesn't go below zero. And once it's getting close, then they have to wait to the next pay to do anything, within reason. Now, for some people, they might set this up, and as you can see, these needs here, 61%, and the short term is about 22%, and then 16.5% for your savings. So a very popular strategy is called the percentages method, where, and they actually say 50, 30, 20, where 50% goes to needs, 30% to wants, and 20% to savings. But for people on lower incomes, the needs is often more than 50%. So here it's, 61. And so, basically 60, 20, 20 in effect. But once you've established what that percentage is, for a lot of people, this is it. That's the last time they'll ever look at a spreadsheet. And from then on, they'll just focus on the percentage moving forward in terms of allocating that, and then just make sure that their spending account doesn't get below zero each fortnight. But let's say that even just for, a go, you're going to press on with the other columns in this spreadsheet. So the next one to add in is a time frame for when each of these line items, so when I talk about a line item, I mean like, okay, electricity bill, gym fees, weekends away, you can see how you start to add some of the richness into your day-to-day life, rather than just thinking, here's a bill, here's how much money I've got. You start to sort of map out, this is what I want, my money life to sort of look like, match to some of those goals. So for each of those, you add a time frame. So for example, rent might come out fortnightly. It might be direct debited, but it comes out fortnightly. The electricity comes out quarterly. So that might be, for example, your part of the electricity bill might be $300 a quarter. So even though from your fortnightly pay, you're going to allocate or accumulate, like accrue $50 towards that quarterly bill. So there's 6 fortnights in a quarter, so $50 times 6 is $300. It just means that you don't have to find $300 then in that fortnight's pay. You're planning ahead and accruing that money so that when the bill comes in, it's already set to just be paid, or indeed will have already been paid by direct debit to the provider. And the phone bill, that might come out monthly, but you set aside $60 into this bills account each fortnight so that when it does come out, it's already covered. And likewise with some of those others. Now, the blue one, which is the savings, so you might want to have $1,000 per annum set aside for trips away, weekends away, whatever it might be, and that's $40 a fortnight. So when your pay goes in, $40 goes into your savings account, and that's what it's allocated towards, right? And you might just set the spreadsheet up once, and then the weekly stuff, or the very least fortnightly, is medical stuff, beverages, takeaway stuff, for groceries, and just personal spending like a coffee on campus, whatever it might be, petrol, for example. And so you've put in their time frame, and so it's weekly, fortnightly, monthly, quarterly, or annually, for example. And so then you're going to add, you'll add which sub account it is. Now you can sort of tell, I've already kind of put that in there because I've got it color coded. So you can see the amounts that go into the direct debit account. If you have your transaction account, which is your spending one, and then you've got two sub accounts, one for bills that are direct debited or bills that you just pay when they come up, but you're accruing money into that account so when the bill arrives, it's not a shock and you've got the money saved. And then the savings is linked to your goals, and that's for the more discretionary type things, the holidays, the haircuts, the birthday gifts, that sort of thing. So then, and all of these columns are on the spreadsheet that I've provided, by the way, with the formulas put in the next few ones. So once you say, okay, that's a sub account that's coming in, but a lot of these things have different timeframes. If only everything could be smoothed out to the exact same timeframe, although in a way it's good that you can stagger some of these payments throughout the year. So some might come out in March, June, September, December, electricity bill, for example, whereas the telephone and internet might come out on the 14th of each month. So at least, and then the weekends away, you want to do that the end of June and the end of December, for example. So you put in here when the different amounts come out. And this is probably one of the trickiest parts because it sometimes means really looking up, when were the last few bills? So this can take some time the very first time you've done it. But once you've done it, you can set and forget it unless something changes to some of those, which doesn't really happen that often to a lot of those ongoing bills. So once you've worked out, okay, this is how much the fortnightly allocation is, you know how much it is, when it comes out and how often. So this column here is the one where you sort of need to think about where you're at. Now we're actually, what are we, beginning of April. So in the last session, I had estimated this based on it being the end of March. So 6 fortnights had already happened in the year. So you'd had six lots of that 1409 that had come in. But when you have a look down, so this is what you, in theory, should have accrued for each of these line items at that point in time. Now, because the rent is paid fortnightly, it's only ever going to be $600 because it goes every fortnight and then it goes back to zero, but then you need $600 for the next fortnight. Whereas, and the electricity, so that comes out the end of March. So it's based on this. If it was the end of March, it's about to come out. So the next pay, it'll be back to $50 because you're just starting to accrue it for the next bill. Then the telephone and internet, so 14th of each month, so 120 is what's going to sort of come out. That'll go back down to 60 once that bill's, gone out. In fact, that, almost could be. Weekends away. So there's been 6 fortnights in the year. You're setting aside $40 a fortnight towards your weekends away. So in that account for that line item should be $240. Okay, now this is just all on the spreadsheet. You don't have to have separate accounts for that. And as you can see, I've already put these formulas. So in that spreadsheet that's gone out, if it's just fortnightly compared to something that comes out quarterly, or something that comes out monthly, I've already put the formulas in. But as you go through, you can automate it so it updates each fortnight with the pay. But sometimes it is useful just once a fortnight. There's 4 steps that I'm going to talk about on a slide coming up to just go through and think, okay, well, this one now needs to be 8 fortnights, or at least the weekends away needs to be 8 fortnights. So this one actually stays as 6 because it's every quarter. So every 6 fortnights that bill gets paid. The savings is often one that you're going to add an extra fortnight to because it keeps accruing sometimes, for longer than a year, but sometimes 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. And so depending on how many fortnights of pay will depend on how much you've got accrued here. Now, I'll give you an example of, see the parking at uni down here. It's $12 a fortnight, gets you $280 for a parking permit. And so, and that comes out in February or the end of February. So it was paid at the end of February. Now this is the end of March. So you've only had 2 fortnights of income come in since you've paid it. So 2 times 12 is 24. So in that pay fortnight, because it has just been paid and you're starting to accrue your $12 a fortnight, so that by next February 2026, you'll have your $280 in that, ready to go. And so once you've allocated that, hopefully this is making sense, but I'm also happy to take go over anything that people have got questions about later. So that is basically automated. I know it looks like there's a lot that we've sort of put in there, but this spreadsheet I've provided, I've got the formulas in there. You do need to put whatever your amounts and line items are in here and when things come out. But once you've done that once, it is kind of set and forget. The things, so these amounts here, and I'll just go to the next slide because it's got the formulas in it. So I've already put the formulas in here. So this is what, if you were to be on track with your budget, this is how much should be in your bills account, your direct debit account at this point in time is $1,484. And that covers all of the amounts for all of these things at this point in time ready. So as the bills just come out, they will. There'll be the money in that account to take it. You can just set and forget as long as the money's always going in. All of these amounts that are green have been totaled in there. All of the blue amounts in terms of where they're at this point in time add up to that. And so looking at the parking, for example, because you've just paid $280 at the end of February, a fortnight ago, when there'd only been 4 pay fortnights, that amount there would have been $280, and then you've paid it, and now it's you've only got the 2 fortnights in for the March, and so it's down to 24. And then the cumulative savings, that's one where this is your weekly stuff, and so it'll be generally the smallest pretty quickly because it's just your weekly sort of spending. Okay, so that automatically adds that up. Now, this is where you actually need to put your real amounts in. So you're going to go to your sub account on your phone app, for example, and think, okay, well, how much have I got in my bills account? I've got $1,552, and you just insert that amount there. And then the actual amount in your savings is 1,254, and the actual amount in your transaction account might be, $150, or it might be 315, for example. So I'm assuming this is the start of the pay. It's just gone in. And so you've put in, this is what should be accrued. This is what you budgeted should be in each of these accounts by this point in time. This is how much actually is, and this is the difference. So this is, and again, I've automated this in the spreadsheet, so it will just calculate. I'll see if I've got a slide for that. No, I don't think I had a slide for it. But anyway, basically it says you're $68 ahead in your direct debits. Yay. You're $90 behind in your savings. So, that's something that you wouldn't necessarily have to adjust at this point in time, but it just goes to show you either drop down one of these things by $90, or you might, bump it up by a few dollars a fortnight so that you can catch up on that. And your spending is, there's no difference between what you've got to spend. So once this is all set up, it's kind of automated. There's 4 things you need to look at each fortnight. So you can sort of set and forget it aside from that transaction account. And then once a fortnight, you check that there's nothing in your line items that needs to change. There's no extra bills. There's nothing that's been taken away. Like say you had a line item here, you might have to pay a friend back, $10 a week, or you might be saving enough to pay them back $200 that you borrowed for something, right? And once you've paid them back, you can take them out. Or you might decide that, you want to get, whatever it might be, you add things in. So, or for a lot of people, it just stays as is and they don't. So just check that nothing needs to change there. And then adjust this for depending on what fortnight it is. And when I say adjust this, I just mean the formulas behind it. So you don't have to sort of do those counts, but for things that adjust fortnightly, that's just a one that stays the same. And it'll probably, anything that gets taken out regularly, it's really the larger bills like the weekends away, things that are annual or every 6 months, you might just need to change the 6 to 8. Or 6 to 7, I should say. So 7 fortnights, then 8 fortnights. And so there's 26 fortnights in a year. So as you get closer to the end of the year or the closer to middle of the year, 13 fortnights, and then you're going to go away at June. And so, you'll use that money then. It'll go back to zero once you come back in July for this line item. So adjusting that is probably the hardest part of each fortnight. But for some people, just having this set up once and then going with percentages is all they need to do, as long as they keep transferring the amounts into each of these accounts each fortnight automatically. So you don't have to rethink of it. You don't think about it again. And then popping in the actual amounts and then checking the reality. So it's those four things is, if once a fortnight you just spend 15 minutes checking there's no extra things to add in or take out, adjusting the fortnights that are longer term, putting the actual amounts in and seeing how you're going. And then you might just think, okay, I'm actually doing better or worse or, whatever it might be. And so that is a way that, on a fortnightly basis, you can plan ahead and budget and set aside money using just 3 accounts to cover all of your bills and, or anything else that you've got that you need to cover, whether it's, savings and that sort of thing. Now, the second budget method. Now, would you prefer that I keep pressing on? Oh, I better actually. Is it 3:25 already? Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm going to press on. Apologies, but I'll be available for questions after. The second budget method is the percentages method. And again, 50, 30, 20 is quite popular, as is 60, 20, 20 and 70, 20, 10 if you've got a low income. And it all depends on your circumstances and whether you're living at home or, renting or share housing. And as you can see in the example I just gave, it's, 61, 22, 16 and a half. And so every fortnight you can automate that 862 goes into that account, 232 goes into your savings account, and then you've just got this short-term spending account's the only one you have to focus on. Now, some people like the digital envelope method, which is rather than just those 3 accounts, they like to have a coffees account, a groceries account, an entertainment account, personal hair account. And it's basically like putting your line items as sub-accounts. Now, the bank that I use, and I can't, specify any particular banks or anything, it only allows 8 sub-accounts on per transaction account, but that's actually pretty good. And I know some have more, but for me, 3 accounts is enough. And having the spreadsheet sitting behind each of those accounts is kind of all I need. Oh, thanks, Ella. She's just popped their spreadsheet up there with all of the formulas and stuff in. Yeah, but anyway, that digital envelope method is another approach. The other one is called the bucket method. Again, this is pretty similar, except rather than using percentages, it is the amounts that goes into your bills account, your spending account, your savings account. And again, you can see how you really have to set up your goals, because if you're wanting to save towards things. Now, for some people, and this is where some of these other more diverse approaches come in. For some people, they don't even want to think about, oh, how much do I want to go on holidays? I just want to save 20% of my income, and at the end of the year, I'll see how much I've got and plan the holiday then. So that's called the anti-budget approach. Now, that's where you might just have a preset amount for bills and savings, and then you spend whatever's left, and that's all that you can do. But at least you have a preset amount. So all it really takes then is looking at, okay, adding up at least roughly what all my bills are going to be, how much that is, and making sure that gets siphoned off when your pay comes in, and then you just focus on having, working within whatever's left. So for people who are very light touch, quite rebellious with budgeting, that can be one thing that works. Another approach is the pick one thing budget. So say, for example, somebody's quite overwhelmed with debt and they just feel like they're never getting anywhere. Sometimes to begin, just picking one thing that you're focusing on until you start to build up is really good. A lot of people can't go from overwhelmed to, oh, let's look at this spreadsheet. Hopefully you can, because you can sort of download it. But anyway, so that pick one thing might be, say they've got some buy now, pay later debt. They might have $400 of buy now, pay later debt. And so for the next 6 pay fortnights, they are going to focus on that and that only in terms of getting it down as well as living. And then once they've paid that off, they can actually have some mental space to think about, oh, what are some other things now I can focus on? Or what's the next thing? It might be paying back some friends or whatever it might be. So experiment, see what works for you. You might even have a combination of some of these things. And there's lots of different ways to budget. There's a whole pile of apps. Now, I've put a link in these slides, which I can make available, that links to some of them. you know, look, I don't endorse or not endorse any of them. I know like things like Raise, and I know a lot of banking apps do this, especially some of the neobanks, where if you've set aside like a savings goal with Raise, say you buy a coffee for $3.80, and you can automate that extra 20 cents up to the next dollar just automatically goes into your savings sub account, you know, that you might save for, you know, your holiday at the end of the year. So every time you buy a coffee, you know, 20 cents goes towards that savings goal. So there's all sorts of ways that these apps can give you nudges towards some of those savings goals. And you can see why I sort of spent a lot of time talking about the spreadsheet method, because regardless of which one you pick, sometimes just at least having that once, just doing it once can help. But I also get that some people are just never going to do that. So that's where at least having some idea of the percentages. And if you're just like, I don't want to think about it, I know what my income is coming in. And so if you think, right, well, you're going to put 70% of that aside for an account for just bills and savings and try and live on 30% in your day-to-day spending. And so that when the rent's due, it goes out of that 70%. Groceries, you know, will come out of your 30%. And so it's, you know, for some people, that's all that they can get to at this point in time, or that's what works for them. And so that might be fine. Other people like having savings clubs with family and friends, particularly for certain events, like, you know, a weekend away at an Airbnb. I know some of my students have sort of said it's a stretch goal for them to try and move out of home. And so they actually save up, and a group of friends will go away to, you know, for four days at an Airbnb just to get some sort of private adult life in their lives. And I just thought that's a sign of the times, really, isn't it? Actually, one of my girls paid for my husband and I to go away for a weekend so that she could have a party at our place. Anyway, so there's lots of things that people save for. And with any of these approaches, you know, really think about the pros and cons. And if you've got that transaction account, really think about labeling the bills account or direct debits, needs, whatever you want to label it as, and then the savings account. So it's really clear in your bank app or statement with the different account labels. So rather than just having a number, like actually put what it is, and then gradually set up those prepayments. I know it might seem like a lot, and I remember I was doing one a month for a while. I mean, it's been years and years and years since I've had them set up now, but once you've got it set up, then you can just sort of set and forget. And that helps with the cash flow smoothing. You don't get bill shock. And then if you can build up an emergency fund, and I know that, you know, honestly, even if it is $50 emergency fund, 100, 200, a lot of people say 3 months worth of income, but I mean, that is just so few people have that sort of emergency fund for a long, long time. So I completely get how potentially unrealistic that might seem. But even just $10 a fortnight towards an emergency sub account, and then if you do get those shocks, then it won't be as bad. And then, you know, take time to reflect on this, see what works for you. Any of these are just proposed guidelines. You know, there's no set rules. You get to adjust it for you and your tendencies. And I just wanted to flag again that the Saver Plus program with the Smith family, if you're eligible, why not practice on this? I think it's $12.50 a week or a fortnight that they save, and they will match the $500 that you save with another $500. So if over 10 months you can save $500, they will give you $500. So there's a line item that you could have on your budget is the Saver Plus program. So and then as part of this program, and I've put the links where you can sign up, there's 5 financial literacy course, and, you know, obviously people on this are already kind of interested in that. This is the eligibility criteria. So you've got to be 18, have a Centrelink payment or credit, current healthcare card, and an eligible payment, regular income, and they're really realistic. Like I said, $500 over 10 months, and they will match that then at the end. You've got to be studying and able to join those 4 workshops, you know. And there's been lots of uptake from university students in that program. Very briefly around some of the common myths with budgeting. Oh, I don't have any debt, so I don't need to budget. You know, we've just talked about these long-term goals. What are you going to do with your 4 million plus 7% return over time? And, you know, even that power of $50 a week. So there's a rule of thumb, the 50-1-50. So $50 a week, that is invested at 7% net return for 50 years is $1 million. And so every $50 over 50 years, you know, you're not just spending 50, even though it's great to spend. Like, money is for living now, a life that you value. You've got to, you know, value, it's your life, but also just sort of think, do I really need another pair of, note to self, shoes? So often it's yes, but anyway. And another myth: budgeting is a luxury. If I can't afford the essentials. And you know, some of the best budgeters are people on the lowest incomes. They know where every dollar goes. They know how to adjust it to make ends meet to the next pay. Or I just don't have the discipline. Well, you don't need to. You can pick the anti-budget approach. There's lots of different approaches. And sometimes it takes practice. Sometimes it's just giving it a go. And we've given you a bit of a nudge by having it set up and pre-populated, and you can just adjust. Not great at maths, you don't have to. That's why we've got calculators and the beautiful Excel. Haven't got time. Okay, we can shorten that. Or you can, again, start with just a really basic, I'll just, you know, keep 30% and the rest can go towards my bills, and see how that works. You know, it can make you feel worse. It can be confronting, but what the research actually shows is that getting it down, it actually does take the mental load off. There's even links to increased short-term IQ capacity and all, you know, cognitive capacity. Or I owe too much to too many people. Well, at least getting a plan and starting it can help to build up trust and your confidence, and be able to at least pay it back gradually. It's a plan just to, you know, it's the first point of departure is at least planning, you know. And it's easier just to not think about it. You know, look, financial strain is one of the biggest reasons people don't continue with study, regardless of how much income they have. It takes away enough. So please try not to let it take away your degree. Better thinking is, you know, budgeting can meet short, long-term goals faster with less regret. It reduces that mental load, even on low incomes. Lots of ways to plan it. Everyone's going to make mistakes. It's never too late. And so please just keep asking for support. Now, if you're broke, budgeting with your broke, first of all, survival is important. We want you to get to the other side of this in one piece. So avoid any immediate disasters. Prioritize the basics. Food and shelter really, really matter, as well as safety. So, you know, yes, face it, but keep asking for help. There's lots of help available on the, well, first of all, the Griffith Cost of Living website, and I've got the link to that coming up. But also there's companies and organisations that can help you negotiate extensions to bills. They can also help you reduce or negotiate reduction in debt, particularly for places like payday lenders and any of those sorts of predatory providers. But they'll also negotiate with utility companies and banks. And now those utility companies and banks have to provide options for financial hardship. So don't worry about calling them if you're not getting the sort of response that you think you should be able to get. Call the National Debt Hotline, free financial counselling, and they will help advocate for you. 1-800-007-007. They'll help you prioritise your debt, work out a plan. Then they can also negotiate payment plans for whichever providers. Consider the no interest loan scheme. I went through that in the first workshop. There's also a link on the Griffiths website. You might look for additional hours of work, but just remember, you know, study's not forever, and sometimes just giving yourself the best chance to get through you know, your study successfully will really pay off over the remaining 75 years of your life when you're, you know, earning income, for example, in that area. And, you know, look at spending, eliminate any unnecessary expenses, really focus on those essentials. But it's also very normal and okay to have debt over time, particularly while you're studying. I mean, then you have debt, you know, for a long time, but it's really about what was that debt used for. Now, if it's stuff like gambling debt and that sort of thing, that's where you really want to go to the National Debt Hotline, and they have lots of support for gambling, addiction, substance use disorders, as well as, of course, financial type counselling. And they'll help you set up a realistic plan with support. And then when it works, even if it's just starting, acknowledge each winning point. You know, gosh, I love Ash Barty. Anyway, now there's a link and some information on the cost of living site, which I went through in the first workshop, but there's so much there. The Griffith Welfare Fair is coming up the 30th of April. And we'll have the Ombudsman and some government services on campus at Brisbane South, Nathan campus, I should say. You're encouraged to RSVP, although if you're on campus, please do come along. And it coincides, like there's a market day at the same time, and also the free fruit and vegetable market. And there's also, you know, lots of good recipes and stuff for that sort of food on the course site. You can talk about the NILS providers, legal advocacy support, lots of local services and charities, and, you know, a whole range of links. So that was what I was going to cover today. Look, I'm going to stop sharing just to ask questions, but I'm also happy to come back to these slides if people have got particular questions. Apologies, I went over again somehow. I kept it right to. Oh yes, Ella, thank you. Yes, we have our Finance Made Easy tax session. So I'll have Melissa Bell-Isle from the Griffith Tax Clinic with me for that session, and we're doing that on the 18th of June, and so it's pre-tax time, and that's going again right back to the basics in terms of setting up the link to the ATO and the on your MyGov, how to do that, how to be patient waiting for the linking code, especially if it's one of your first times or the first time that you've made that link, because you have to get a special code. But doing that before the end of tax year can be really good to at least set up the link in MyGov, because otherwise you can go weeks without being able to get through. And so that session is coming off on the 18th of June. Again, it'll be recorded, so you can watch it at any point. Please encourage people to have a look at some of these things. This is just part of the extras that we're doing. So now, before I sign off, and thank you, Hadasha, love the heart emojis, and hello, Emma and Emma, and of course, Ella, thank you for adding those things on. Now, are there any questions before we sign off and see you for next time? Or comments? How was that for you, Hadasha?